Hi, and welcome to Cyber Thoughts, the podcast where we explore the industry of information security through leaders in the field. Today, it's my great pleasure. Welcome back, Mike Privette of Return on Security. In this episode, Mike and I are going to do some predictions for 2025. Every other podcast seems to be doing that, and we're not immune. So here we go. Mike, great to see you.
Hey, thanks, Lucas. Thanks for having me on again.
Our pleasure. So I'm going to kick it off to you for the first prediction of our podcast. What do you have going on in 2025?
Well, so I think there's a lot that could happen in 2025 based on like the way the year shook out. And so the first one obviously has to be about AI because you can't say one of these prediction episodes without talking about the word AI. But I'm going to be a bit more narrow and I'm going to say I think that 2025, the prediction is that this is the year that AI helps DLP or data loss prevention technologies become real for the very first time. People will light bulb, aha, it actually could be working this time.
So I love that because the historical problem with DLP is you have to get all of your users to actually mark their data, right?
Yep. Classification, it's a very heavy lift in terms of like actually getting people to agree on the data classification terminology and levels. Not even to mention like the handling procedures associated with each. But then there's kind of no good way to historically introduce DLP that doesn't just like break somebody's workflow, like break an email, break a transaction, would just generally be a pain. But I think, at least I hope, based on some of the startups I've seen and some of the conversations I've had, I think that this is getting smarter and a lot more targeted instead of like a broad rule that captures maybe a social security number and a phone number and like a national insurance number. They can get really detailed around like what's a company secret versus what's an M&A document versus what's just a personal social from your W-2. So I think LLMs will really shine here since it's all text.
So I've got a question. You mentioned startups, but this one feels like incumbents might have the big advantage of distribution, Microsoft or
Mhm.
Google or Salesforce. Where do you think startups slot in, or do you feel like this is one of the ones where like, no, Microsoft's just going to eat everyone's lunch?
I think it's possible that the big ones like Microsoft will have like a very long head start on many of these things. Like if you're already using the whole Office suite, then you're already very well in that environment. Now you see Microsoft has done really well over the years of just turning on features that didn't exist before, and then it's already there. Doesn't mean it's the best feature. Doesn't mean it's the most baked out or thought out, but it's available to play around with. But I think it's going to be similar to other kind of iterations where the big players can turn it on, especially like your CASB or like your SASE kind of vendors who are already kind of intercepting network traffic to and from, endpoints. But then startups are really good at navigating around those for very specific use cases and like typically better applications because they're not weighed down by all the other products and all the other kind of institutional inertia that comes with large companies. So I think we'll see a bit of a distribution curve there, but I think we'll see both the early and the big companies like start enabling this.
Awesome. All right, so I'm gonna do my first one.
Yeah, what do you got?
Well, so as a venture capitalist, I have to say the IPO window is opening. But
Yes.
in this, I'm speaking to kind of the right guy. You have all the data. So I'm going to say we've got a bunch of those zombie coins, right? Those
Mhm.
unicorns that were flat that kind of needed to be cleaned up. A lot of that cleanup has happened, right? So we've already seen a good bit of the companies kind of get removed if they're not going to make it. And so we've got high quality companies left with large amounts of revenue. And so I think this is the year they go out. But I'm going to turn it to you because you watch this market much more closely than almost anybody.
Well, I would say, yeah, I would agree with you largely here. Like the IP market has been waiting. We saw last year we saw the first cyber adjacent company in Rubrik go live, and I think to be honest, like that was a very much a nod to like if I were to pick like a word of the year for 2024, I would say like resilience, like disaster recovery, resiliency, recovery, all those things. Rubrik fit that very well in that space. And so you see a lot of disaster recovery and BCP kind of companies coming out of the woodworks and doing it very well now because it's not a matter of if but when and how well you recover. Um, but to that end, like I think that was a good step in the a good dip in the pool, so to speak, like dipping your toe in. Um, There's been a bunch of companies who have been rumored probably like every year since I can remember, like, Tanium, Arctic Wolf, like all these big ones have had all the right signals, like from the outside and from the right kind of rumor mill of like, yes, they have market share. Yes, they have the right level of AR. Although I will say that the ARR numbers have gone up every year now since the bust, or since like the expense management era, I call it, since like 2022 has occurred. But I do think, yeah, I think we'll see several coming in the pipeline. But I also think many, nobody likes to be first in these unless they're like kind of a really a sure shot. So I think we'll see not a flood, but I think we'll between 2025 and 2026. I think we'll see like a pretty much healthy rate. And I was actually doing some analysis on just how many companies per year used to IPO in cyber back in all the way back from like 1999 up to like to current date, and it's been about 2 to 3 cyber companies a year. That's just the pure play cyber companies. It wasn't every year. 2018, 2019, 2020 had more than 2 or 3 a year. And then it was very silent, for 2022, 2023. But then 2024, rubric came out. That's kind of a parallel to the broader tech industry as well. So I think once that floodgate, the tech floodgate, opens a bit more, I think we'll see cyber follow kind of suit.
Cool. Just for our edification, what's the growth rate and what's kind of the level of revenue you need to go public? And I know it's a scale, right? The faster you're growing, the less revenue you need, so on and so forth. But what does that kind of look like today?
Yeah, well, I'll say like what it used to look like was like basically once a company hits 100 million ARR, that was the magic signal for the market to like start shopping your banker to go IPO effectively. Like if that was in the play and the goal was to go from there, like that's when you effectively got your house in order, so to speak. That is now like nowhere near enough. And honestly, many of these private companies are well past that. Some of the ones we talked about. And so I think people are really looking closer to that 300 to 500 mil ARR, which is kind of mind boggling when you think about it. And
Inflation's a
whoever,
real thing.
yeah, yeah. And honestly, whoever comes out first, like it's going to set a different benchmark for some of the other ones, especially like if it's a pure play cyber and not one that's like, one part IT, one part security kind of company like Rubrik is. But that's typically the growth. And I'm hearing even higher numbers than that from other conversations too. Like they really would rather you have 5 to 6 if you can get us, obviously within the expectation to grow into a multi-billion-dollar ARR company. But I think that's gonna be hard. I think expectations on the street and like for investors have changed a lot. So I think that's gonna be really hard to come true.
Yeah, well, it has been a lot easier for companies to get those larger rounds done in the private markets. So I
Mm-hmm.
guess it is less important for the company to go public to get, $100 million, $200 million of funding. So that probably is part of it, right? That you can now do that in the private markets. Cool.
Yeah, and look at Databricks too. Like there is a 10 billion Series J, which I didn't even know went that far. I've never seen a Series J. So I've heard somebody jokingly say like Series J is the new IPO. But yeah, 10 billion valued at 62 billion. So like it's hard to like unsee those numbers.
Well, there's that. And we now have ways for founders and even regular employees to get liquidity in the secondary market. And so it really
Yes.
takes a lot of pressure off of companies to go public, right? Like, no, I can make sure my employees can cash out. I can do it in a manner that I get to decide who the new investors are. Kind of famously, Facebook was forced into an IPO because their cap table got too large. But
Hmm.
had it not been for that, they might have stayed private longer.
I
At least
bet
that's what they said at the time.
interesting. I bet Zuck wishes he was still private now without all the regulatory oversight and having to buddy up to whoever's in office.
Yeah, having to go to Congress every few years probably not ideal.
How do you make money? Ads, Senator. I'm sure he'd love to not have that.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely true. All right, so for my next prediction, I'm going to say that this is the year that personal cyber insurance becomes a thing. Turns out you can buy personal cyber insurance. I didn't know that until I did some
Interesting. I
research
didn't know that
here.
either. What
No,
does that cover?
well, exactly. And you can the obvious one is LifeLock, right? So LifeLock,
Oh yeah. Okay.
if you get hacked, like so that's personal cyber insurance. Though I'm starting to see some startups try to drive more down the no, we're gonna help you with your router. You buy hardware from us, and if
Hmm.
you get broken in through that,
Pay you
will
out.
take over. But with
Interesting.
the oncoming of massive deep fakes, the fact that a CFO of a real company can get fooled,
Hmm.
that doesn't bode well for us or our parents or your family members or whomever. I do think that is an area where personal cyber insurance may become a real thing this year.
Well, that's interesting too, and I think for me that's kind of like another tool in like this broader like personal digital sovereignty kind of like at an area where it's like people have to have they don't want their data to be sold or trafficked through legal matters, let alone like the black market stuff. So you got people watching or having making companies that have companies help you delete personal information through like regular legal various means, and then also watch for your data to be dumped on the dark web, and then at the same time like making sure you have like all your personal devices personally checked and updated. I kind of see all that kind of converging around that space, and I could easily see this being another kind of thing that either a company offers or just something that like, hey, this is just it's a good just in case something goes terribly wrong.
I mean, this would be, Apple has clearly not done great thus far with their AI offerings, right? So Apple
Yeah.
Intelligence, not so much. Like I've got people turning it off because it just gets in the way. But you could see, your conversations aren't recorded on your iPhone. In fact, other apps can't get into them.
Hmm.
But Apple could very easily turn on the LLM and say, hey, this text message looks like fraud. You should not click on that link. And that would give them a really, tie in nicely in their privacy story. So you can see a
Yeah.
world in which Apple becomes, kind of a player in that space.
No, it makes sense. They've already got like the narrative, like of that what they've shaped it so that they're the one seen as the privacy focused one over Google, even though it's just like a variation of the same thing that Google does. Apple has always had better marketing, so I think theirs could easily, yeah, they could win a lot. I mean, and honestly, I think they could still win the AI game because they're already on the hardware through much of the world. Like it could really be like the start of like a big tipping point.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is that they, could get paid by ChatGPT or,
Hmm.
whomever, right? You want on Google or whatever to be the, they'll. I want to be in front of the I don't know, 20% of the most wealthy people in the world. I want my thing to be shipped on Apple hardware.
Yeah,
It's what they've done with search to quite great effect, right? It's money that just drops right to their bottom line. I think it's $1 billion a year that Google pays them to be the search engine. So why not have OpenAI or Gemini pay you $1 billion a year to be the driver for their AI. So you can see Apple winning in that way, or actually catching up and training their own models, because they've got a massive data set that no one else has.
that's true. They do have something very unique, and I guess like with more models going open source and Meta kind of really forcing that at hand, like it's the obviously the measures of how good a model is or isn't is changing pretty much every day in the industry, but it's becoming cheaper and simpler and easier to use. And that honestly, that kind of like brings me into my second prediction. It's actually an anti prediction. And who knows, I may get skewed for this later in the year, but I don't think agentic AI for cyber is going to be a thing in 2025.
Why? This is a good one.
So I mostly think the same reason that a lot of the LLM stuff hasn't truly taken off in cyber outside of a very few use cases, like around the AI enabled SOC analyst or the AI agent for application security. And agentic will be the same thing, but perhaps worse because it requires so much infrastructure to be true. So like companies are already historically bad at understanding their data, having it clean, having it formatted, having it usable in a way that's like consistent, and having all of the access to the data they need at all the time. And if you don't give the agents the right context, you're going to just be fighting with it the entire time. So I think not that it won't be offered, but I think it won't be well received because it's a complex thing that companies were already not good at prior to AI. Now the AI just shows how bad they are at it and what context is missing. So I think it will come, but it will not be well received yet. I think it's like a 26, 27 thing.
Interesting. So I've got this question about. So originally, the LLMs, the hallucination problem is massive, right? And it's basically statistical next word. Like, hey, I predict the next word's going to be blah. Um, but adding the reasoning engines on top, where it says, hey, here's the steps I would go down. That's proving to be pretty powerful. So I wonder if we go from a situation where the AIs really are not good at this because you're looking for a needle in the haystack, and statistically, you don't find the needle, right? Most of the time,
Mm,
there's nothing there. So it should
yeah.
say there's nothing there. But the reasoning engine might get us there. My statement is there's a lot of money in cybersecurity. People want this. So you're going
Right.
to see solutions. I still fall on the side of I don't think statistical probability matching is the right answer. And I haven't
Yeah.
seen anything yet that leads me to believe you want that in a mission critical spot.
Right.
With that said, people are letting AI write a whole bunch of code right now,
Yeah.
and most of the code they train on is not great, right? Like most of the stuff in GitHub you have access to is not super hardened code. It's, yeah, that was my project for CS 252 or whatever.
Yeah, no, it's a good point too, and I think as more software is written by AI agents and then read by AI agents, like I think we might see a bit of a scale improvement on some of that stuff, but that it still assumes a whole bunch of context. And given that, like a lot of the models are still like stochastic, and they still they could rewrite the entire code base every time theoretically because it's hard to make small changes and get the exact same thing you got last time. And like prompt engineering has gotten better at that. The models have gotten better, but it's hard to make small edits on some of those things today. And so I think that will be the trick. So like I think AI agents can be true. I think once we kind of get like tiers of these AI systems, like one that is very good at the data wrangling side or like the normalization side and like fixing kind of like system of record side of things, which requires like business changes and maybe business process changes and different ways we work, and then adding reasoning, then adding like context of like not only what I have but like what does known bad or false positive look like. But then like it still won't quite be enough. So like every security practitioner I talk to kind of wants they want the future idea of I ask the AI agent tells me everything I need to know eventually, and then me as a human I know already if I have to take action or not, but it has to require like the entire business context. Like, not just is this thing exploitable and not just is this thing on the internet, but who owns the applications and the systems themselves? Who's on call right now that can respond to it or make a change? What kind of data does reside on it? Like, how much money does this part of the infrastructure make us as a company to warrant whether or not I make a breaking change or like take something on or offline? Like, there's just so much context I think that will be impossible to get at this point. Like we'll get there. That's why I just think it's just early. I think we'll see like the first sprouts of agentic AI sprouts. I hope somebody quotes me on that through the year.
I like it. Um, all right, so I've got my final prediction, and that's that Gartner is finally going to recognize, or not finally recognize, is going to recognize the tie-in of cybersecurity and crypto. Right, so they're
Mm,
going to create one of their famous charts, either the wave or cybersecurity and crypto. And my thesis is really simple. With the kind of new administration coming in being wildly crypto friendly,
right.
cryptography is going to take off again on a tear, and cybersecurity is not immune to the hey, there's a shiny thing. And so that's my prediction is Gartner comes up with that. But my honest thought is there are a bunch of places where some of those tools are really going to be valuable, though the blockchain is often just a really slow kind of crappy database that comes with free public and private keys, right? And so like people are like, I'm using the chain. And you're like, are you really like, well, I'm using public private key cryptography. You're like, well, yeah, but you don't need the slow database for that.
Right.
But I do think that's an area that Gartner's gonna want to get some thought leadership around.
Yeah, it makes sense. Honestly, I'm surprised they haven't done anything about it yet, just because like the sheer amount of money that has like exchanged hands and has been like scammed like through crypto exchanges. And I agree with this this prediction broadly, just because as long as people lose money, cyber will always have to be there, like fraud and like crypto. It's wildly speculative betting in its best case and wholesale fraud in its worst case. And like there's so many examples of just fraud, money laundering, traditional like crime syndicate type thing activities that happen by way of these immutable ledgers. But there's been a bunch of companies who've been tracking. They can just see like the illicit trade of drugs or illicit trade of washed funds. But I'm really surprised that Gartner hasn't come out with this yet. But I think part of it is kind of the mystique behind crypto, or is there any utility other than making like fake coins like behind this?
Well, as it turns out, one of the big utilities is paying ransoms, right? Ransomware has
Mm.
gone through
Yeah,
the roof since digital payments
successfully. Yeah,
became an easy thing to do, right?
yeah,
So kudos to cyber criminals for figuring that one out.
yeah,
With that said, I do think internet native digital money is like when you put it that way, it sounds sort of like a good idea. Like, oh yeah, I want internet native
yeah.
digital money. But, like every technology, sin, adopts it first.
Yeah, that's a good point too, and it's also interesting too from like an outside of the U.S. perspective is that it's still widely used in like much of the world. Like for regular transactions. Like I went to Switzerland over the holiday break, and you could it's a very Bitcoin first country. Like you can pay for
Really?
Bitcoin. Yeah, you can pay for a restaurant meal with Bitcoin in some places. Um, and they have a lot of pushes toward that, and that's just one example. But like there's many more in like Southeast Asia. I think that's pretty much where all crypto security companies have originated from at this point, is in that Southeast Asia region, and for good reason, because people still use it there. It's like a different, transacting with so many different cultures and currencies. People find it, useful. So as long as it's still going to be used for like legitimate things, and as long as people still get scammed or defrauded, like cyber's going to have to be there.
Do you think Meta resurrects their what was their coin called? They had a coin they were going to make, and then they backed away from it. But now that Zuck is into masculine energy, you think
Yeah.
they re-release that?
Maybe. Who knows? That's interesting. I guess it depends on like how favorable, like how far does the anti-regulation or deregulation go in crypto in the US? Because it's, pretty much all coin or ICOs or initial coin offerings have just ended up being like rug pulls for many people outside of like the
I,
basics.
I still have an ape. We're doing great. We're
Yeah,
doing great.
there you go. So that's one of the few that has somehow has had enduring utility.
Yeah, that would have been my first guess, right? Like 4 years ago. Oh, the apes. Those are going to be worth money.
Yeah. I'm gonna take a screenshot so I can have a copy.
Stay with my ape. I'm going to let you wrap it up with the final prediction if you got one.
I don't have one. I was trying to think because we talked about some really good stuff. What else?
All right. So then I'm going to switch gears on you. Uh, New Year's resolutions, things you're planning on doing. What's 2025? What has you excited in 2025?
I don't really do New Year's resolutions. I used to like many years ago, but then I just realized like I could start something anytime. So I just like kind of I'm like, oh, I don't need to wait to an arbitrary date. I'll just do that. It's kind of fun when I remember that, like, oh yeah, I can just do this. I'm an adult. But plans this year, honestly, it's just I hope to travel quite a bit more for fun and for return on security. Already got a couple conferences lined up. Really excited about that. Hope to add a few more along the way. Um, and then really like I want to I want to make sure I'm pulling out as much as I can from what I'm already doing at Return on Security and turning into like new content, like formats or avenues or things that people can find valuable. Because I think that's a lot of fun for me to do personally.
Have you thought of a NFT with an ICO?
And actually, I have a few for a while. I had a few NFTs. They were like jokes that I'd made, and I'd always put them at like one Ethereum and hope somebody would just buy it. But of course, that never happened. And then I think that the exchange I had it on went belly up.
So now
OpenSea.
that's a
Well,
big collector's item. So go
yeah,
out
it could
there,
be.
find the early return on security NFTs and grab them.
Yeah, there you go. How about you? Any
Awesome.
any plans?
So I do like to do new things at the beginning of every year, only because I think it's a nice time to reset, right? Like you can start your clock and you know exactly when you started.
Right.
So this quarter, I'm doing a kind of a deeper dive into AI technology, right? So I'm going to try to actually understand maybe not the state of the art, but kind of the state of today on LLMs and the training. So I've been watching some of the videos on that and trying to read some of the books on it. So that's my January, like get to the point where if someone starts kind of going down the here's the architecture of LLM, I'm not just nodding sagely and internally going, I do not understand a word they're saying. Um, so that's kind of my big one. And then yeah, No, but I like New Year's. I get a kick out of closing off the last year and saying, well, that year stunk, but this year is
Yeah.
going to be the year that everything comes up my way.
Yeah.
So
No, I
not
do
that
like the
last
new
year's.
energy a year
Yeah,
brings like that. That is fun. Even if, no matter how you get into it, it's kind of exciting.
definitely. All right, boss. Well, thank you so much for joining us again. And where can we find you on the internet?
Yeah. Thanks for having me. And returnonsecurity.com is the best place. And I'm also Mike Privette on LinkedIn. So yeah, you can reach out there.
Thanks, Mike, and happy New Year to our listeners.
Thanks.
And we're out.